History was made on the floor of the Senate chamber today. I don't think it's ever happened before. Think about this. 50 out of the 100 senators came to the floor with the Vice President of the United States and voted to begin debate on a bill they've never seen. A bill they've never seen. Because we don't know what the Republicans are going to offer as the alternative to the Affordable Care Act. There's been a lot of different versions. Technically, the one that's before us now is the version that passed the House of Representatives, but I think the Republican leader, Senator McConnell, knows from the beginning that has no chance whatsoever. So many Republicans have taken a look at what the House passed and said, we can't vote for that. You've got to give us something different. The problem that the Senate Republicans ran into is they couldn't come up with anything better. They tried. They wrote several different versions, and every time they would write a version of the new Affordable Care Act, it got worse. Worse for the American people. And here's what I mean. Under the one proposal from the Republicans, not the one before us, but the Senate Republicans, 1 million people in my home state of Illinois would have lost their health insurance. 12.5 million people in Illinois, 1 million would have lost their health insurance because of dramatic cutbacks in Medicaid and cutbacks in the premium support that's given to a lot of working families to buy regular health insurance on the health insurance market. It was so terrible that every time the Republicans came up with a Senate proposal, 2 or 3 of them would announce, can't buy it, won't vote for it, and ran away from it. So Senator McConnell came to the floor today and said, I'm begging you, just vote to open the debate on a bill that I haven't written yet. 50 Republican senators did. And the vice president broke the tie, the 50-50 tie, to move forward. And here we are. Let me start by tossing flowers, and this will probably get them in trouble, to 2 Republican senators, Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. Those were the only 2 Republican senators who had the courage to stand up and say, this is wrong. We shouldn't do this to the American people. They're the only 2 who were willing to say, we should have done this differently. But there was an interesting thing happened at the end of this. At the very last moment, the very last vote that was cast by Senator John McCain. Everybody knows that John is diagnosed with a serious form of cancer. He made it back from Arizona here to cast this vote, and he asked for 15 minutes after the roll call to make a speech. I don't think many, if any, senators left the chamber. Democrats and Republicans stuck around to hear his speech after the vote. Can I tell you that's unusual in the Senate? Most of us race for the doors and go up to our offices and watch on television and may catch a piece of that speech and a piece of the other speech. But we sat and we listened because of our respect for John McCain. He's my friend. We came to the House of Representatives together many years ago. I've served with him in the Senate when we put together a bipartisan group to rewrite the immigration laws of America, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans. I sat across the table from John for months. We went back and forth on all the provisions of immigration. John even conceded it today. He's got an interesting temper. There were days when John McCain was Mount Vesuvius, just exploding in every direction, and you kind of step back. And then there were days when he just smothered you with kindness. That's the way he is. We love him for it. Well, he came today to give a speech which every American should read if you want to understand how a Democrat senator can stand on the floor and give compliments and praise to a Republican senator, which I'm about to do. Senator McCain said, we've got to do something about this country of ours, the political divisions. I won't get the words perfectly, but he said to us, will you please start ignoring these radio and TV and internet talking heads who want us to fail and make a living by laughing at us? Will you ignore those people, instead look to what this institution, the United States Senate, is all about and what we should be doing to solve the problems of the people we represent? John McCain went on to say, why don't we have debates on the floor of the Senate anymore? You know what? He's right. We're 7 months into this year's Senate session. We've not had one bill on the floor of the Senate that we've debated and amended. Not one. This is a first. And it's in this kind of convoluted reconciliation process where you speed up the amendments. Think about this. We are amending your health care policy that affects you and your family. We're amending how you will buy health insurance as an individual, how your company will buy health insurance for you. We are amending basically whether your insurance policy is going to protect your family or not. Listen to how it works. People propose an amendment, and then we debate it. Do you know how long we debate it? 1 minute on each side. Disgraceful. And John McCain called us on it today and said, why have we reached this point when an issue this important is going through a process that was totally partisan? You see, the Republicans decided early on they weren't going to invite us to the party. They were going to write this health care bill by themselves in secret. Senator McConnell picked 13 Republican senators, and they sat for I don't know how long, months, weeks, and wrote a bill, one of them that I mentioned earlier, that ultimately was rejected by the Republicans themselves. And John McCain challenged us, said, for goodness sakes, he'd been in the Senate, I have too, at a time when it was much different, and he really begged us, pleaded, and urged us to get back to that time when we worked together on a bipartisan basis to solve problems. Well, John McCain was right. I didn't agree with his vote to put us in this position we're in at this moment, but I was encouraged by the way he closed. He turned to Senator McConnell, who was sitting right there, and said to him, don't count on my vote on final passage. I want to see what we do in this bill. I want to see how we debate this bill. One Republican senator like John McCain can make the difference as to whether or not this process stops and a real bipartisan process starts. Isn't that what the American people expect of us? Seated in the chair, and the presiding officer is a brand new senator from the state of Alabama. Welcome, Senator Strange. He comes here because Senator Sessions went on to become the Attorney General. He has seen the Senate for a couple months, 3 months maybe, 5 months now, and I'm sure he has his impressions of this body, and they may be different than what he thought about it before he was elected. But I can tell him for sure that this is a much different Senate, the one Patty Murray was elected to, much different than the one I was elected to, even Mike Enzi, my friend from Wyoming, much different than what he saw. I see my colleague Senator Schatz from Hawaii here. How long you been here, Brian, now? 4.5 years. He's a newbie. And he has not seen the Senate that I'm describing. Can you believe there was a time in the Senate where we'd bring a measure to the floor, an important measure on many different issues, and members would come to the floor, I'm not making this up, and actually hand an amendment to the clerk and say, I'd like an offer amendment to this bill. And then we would debate it, and then we would vote it. And sometimes you won and sometimes you lost, and you moved on to the next amendment. That actually happened on the Senate floor. And for people new to the Senate, I'm sure they don't believe me, but it did over and over and over. And we had a healthy respect for one another. The amendments went back and forth. And we ended up seeing bills passed that made a difference in America. What we're doing now is a disgrace to this institution, and it doesn't honor the Senate, its members, or our Constitution. And what's at stake is so important. Looking at some of the provisions that have been brought before us in the Senate, Republican repeal bills to repeal the Affordable Care Act, I don't know how they can do it. I don't know how a senator could go home and say in their home state, 1 million of you are going to lose your health insurance because of something I just voted for. Health insurance means a lot to me personally. I've said it on the floor. There was a time in my life, brand new, law student, married, God sent me and my wife this beautiful little baby, and she had some health issues. And we had no health insurance. I was a law student. And we ended up sitting in the charity ward of a local hospital here in Washington, hoping that our baby girl would have a good, talented, capable doctor walk through the door and see her. I wasn't sure of it because I didn't have health insurance. I'll never forget that as long as I live. And I thought to myself, it'll never happen to me again. I'm going to have health insurance no matter what it takes. It meant that much to me. And it means that much to everybody. There isn't a single one of us who doesn't want the peace of mind of knowing that if we get sick or someone we love gets sick, they have access to good hospitals, good doctors. That's what health insurance is all about. And as the Republican proposals eliminate health insurance for 16 million, 20 million, 30 million Americans, you say to yourself, how can you do that to this country? And the cuts they make in Medicaid have really educated America about Medicaid. People know Social Security. They know what that's all about. We all pay into it and wait to receive our Social Security checks when we reach that age. And they know about Medicare. You have to be 65 years of age. Pretty good coverage, isn't it? The ones who receive it think it's a pretty good deal to have Medicare coverage when they reach the age of 65. But Medicaid was one of those mystery programs. People weren't sure, what does it do? The Medicaid program in America does the following. In Illinois, that program takes care of half of the new mothers and their babies. Half of them paid for by Medicaid. Prenatal care to make sure the baby's healthy, the delivery of the baby, mom and baby afterwards taken care of, paid for by Medicaid, 1 out of every 2 births in Illinois. Medicaid also sends provisions, money, to your local school district. Bet you didn't know that. If your local school district has a special education program, and virtually all of them do, they receive Medicaid to pay for some basics. Counselors for special ed students, sometimes transportation. In a local school district in downstate Illinois, feeding tubes for severely disabled students, paid for by Medicaid. You may not know that for disabled people, Medicaid is their health insurance. Many of them have no place else to turn. I mentioned on the floor before, a mother in Champaign, Illinois with an autistic child says, Senator, if it weren't for Medicaid, my son would have to go into an institution. I couldn't afford it. But Medicaid is his health insurance. But I haven't touched the most expensive part of Medicaid, which you may not know. 2 out of 3 people in nursing homes depend on Medicaid to get basic medical care. Medicare is not enough. They need the help of Medicaid. So if it's mom or dad, grandma or grandpa, and they're in a nursing home, 2 out of 3 of them depend on Medicaid. So the Republican bill to replace the Affordable Care Act said, we're going to cut the spending on Medicaid. 25 to 35% will be cut. That's why governors of both political parties scream bloody murder. You can't do that. You're cutting the federal contribution to Medicaid in our state. Who's going to pay for that baby? Who's going to pay for mom? Who's going to pay at the school district? Who's going to pay the disabled? Who will take care of the folks in nursing homes? Why did they make that deep a cut in Medicaid, a program that's so important to so many people? Here's the tough part. That deep a cut was made in Medicaid so the Republicans, in their health care proposal, could include a tax break for the wealthiest people in America, for health insurance companies, and get this, for pharmaceutical companies. So to give them tax breaks, they had to cut Medicaid coverage for all the people I just described. Is it any wonder that many Republicans backed away from this? Senator Heller of Nevada talked to his governor, Sandoval, both Republicans, and said he couldn't support an early version of the bill because of the deep cuts in Medicaid. So if this is supposed to be an improvement over the Affordable Care Act, which part of it is an improvement? Cutting Medicaid coverage for all those people? Saying that your health insurance policy doesn't have to cover people with pre-existing conditions? Raising the cost of health care premiums, particularly for people between the ages of 50 and 64? Eliminating health insurance for millions? That's an improvement over the current system? It's not. It's a disaster. And the question is, by the end of this debate, after we've gone through this crazy process of voting up and down quickly, very little debate, at the end of this debate, will one more Republican senator stand up and say, unacceptable? 2 of them have. If one more will join them, then we can get down to the real business we should face. And the real business is being the Senate again. Regular order, which means taking the measure to the Help Committee. Senator Murray of Washington here is the ranking Democrat. Senator Lamar Alexander is the chairman from Tennessee. I respect him and like him a lot. The 2 of them ought to have hearings on a bill to change the Affordable Care System and make it work better. Bring down the cost of premiums. Expand health insurance coverage. I think that's what we should be all about. Now, there's a basic difference in philosophy here, and I'll close with this. But this is what drives us. Answer the following question, and I can tell you how you're going to vote on this bill. Do you believe health care is a right for every American, or do you believe it's a privilege? That if you have enough money and you're lucky enough, you can get it. If you don't, you go without. If you answer the question, it's a right, it should be a right in America, then you have to reject this approach. You cannot take helpless people, some who are working hard in jobs, 2 and 3 jobs at a time that have no health care benefits, and say to them, sorry, our system won't take care of you. One last point. The irony of that is if you don't give a person health insurance, if you don't give them protection, they still get sick. They still go to the hospital, and they still get care. What happens to their bills that they can't pay? Everybody else pays them. Before the Affordable Care Act, each of us paid $1,000 a year in premiums just to cover for people who couldn't afford health insurance. We think there's a better way. We think Americans should have access to affordable health insurance across the board. And we think we can achieve that if we work together on a bipartisan basis. So I hope one more Republican senator will join Senators Collins and Murkowski. Bring us back to what John McCain described on the floor today, to the Senate where you have a real debate about real issues and really care about the American people. Mr. President, I yield the floor.